Nikki.
Oh, don't worry.
I did. I don't know about this, guys. We're not. You'll hear him out. Last time I checked, you had to be American to be in the CIA. So why did you leave the agency, Mr. Cobb?
Just haven't found my way back yet. Yesterday afternoon, local, 17 of the students at gunpoint. The youngest was 8. South Sudanese asked the U.S. for help. Some of my ex-colleagues at the CIA feel differently. Last overflight confirmed the personnel on site. We'll never find them again.
Immortality sounds like a gift, not in the vague, poetic sense, not your legacy lives on or you'll be remembered forever. The real thing, actual, biological, cannot be killed immortality, where every bullet punches through you and you just get back up, where wars come and go and empires crumble and you're still standing in the rubble, brushing the dust off and moving on to the next one. Sounds incredible, right? The old guard opens with the quiet, devastating answer to that question, and the answer is no. Not after long enough. Not once you've watched everyone you've ever loved age and disappear while you stay exactly the same. Not when you've been doing this for so long that you can barely remember what hope used to feel like. This movie is a superhero film in structure, but in its bones, it's something much closer to a meditation on exhaustion, on what it costs to keep going when stopping isn't an option. From its very first frames, it doesn't ease you in. It drops you straight into the world. We're in Morocco, a bar or something like it. Low light, the kind of place where nobody asks who you are or where you came from, which, for the woman sitting alone at that table, is exactly the point. Her name is Andromache of Scythia, Andy for short. Played by Charlize Theron, who brings a quality to this role that I genuinely don't know how to describe other than ancient. Not old, not tired in an ordinary way. Ancient, like someone who's watched enough centuries pass that drama doesn't really register anymore unless it's existential. The way Charlize carries her body in this role, the set of her jaw, the economy of her movements, tells you everything you need to know before a word of dialogue. This is a woman who has survived things that haven't been recorded in any history book. She's older than Rome, older than most languages currently spoken on Earth. And right now, she's nursing a drink and waiting for a phone call that she already suspects she shouldn't answer. James Copley calls. Chiwetel Ejiofor plays him with that specific quality he has. Completely steady, completely reasonable, someone you'd trust, completely right up until something shifts in your gut and you're not sure why. Copley is a former CIA operative with whom Andy's team has worked before. He has a job, schoolgirls, kidnapped, South Sudan. They'll be moved within hours. Once they move, they're gone. Andy says no. This matters more than it might seem. Andy's team operates by a rule so hardened it's basically law. Never work for the same employer twice. You get seen once, maybe that's a coincidence. Running out of time. the moral weight of it pressed deliberately and skillfully against the one part of Andy that hasn't completely calcified, her sense of purpose. She agrees, against her own rules, against every instinct built from centuries of survival. The team assembles. Booker is first. Full name, Sebastian Lelivre, though nobody ever uses it. Matthias Schoenaerts plays him with this particular kind of quiet devastation. Booker became immortal somewhere around the time of the Napoleonic Wars, which makes him the newest of the group, barely 200 years old by their standards, and yet somehow he looks the most broken. The loss he carries hasn't calcified the way Andy's has. It's still raw, still accessible. You see it in the pauses between his words? Then Joe and Nikki. Yusuf Al-Kaisani and Niccolò Di Genova, Marwan Kenzari and Luca Marinelli, a pair so completely synchronized it's almost uncanny to watch. They finish each other's movements the way other people finish each other's sentences. Joe is warm and loud and present, the kind of person who takes up exactly as much space as the room needs. Nikki is quieter, more precise, moving like someone who has never in 1,000 years wasted emotion. They've been together in every meaningful sense for longer than most institutions currently operating on the planet have existed. Watching the four of them coordinate is something. No wasted words, no second guessing. The shorthand of people who've watched each other die and come back so many times that trust isn't even a concept anymore. It's just a fact of physics. They go to South Sudan. The building is wrong the moment they enter. Professionals feel the wrongness before they can articulate it. Too quiet in the wrong places, not quiet enough in others. The geometry of the space arranged in a way that doesn't match a location being used to hide kidnapped children. Andy feels it. She moves through anyway. Because they're already in, because the girls might still be here, because hope is a difficult thing to kill even in someone who has tried. No girls. The doors open and the soldiers pour out. A lot of them, too many, positioned at angles that confirm this wasn't a rescue site, it was a killing floor. The guns come up simultaneously, which is the last detail that matters, the detail that confirms they knew exactly who was walking in. The team is killed. Not a close call, not barely surviving. They are shot down, multiple hits, point blank, the kind that don't leave questions about whether the person is dead. The soldiers move through the space methodically, confirming what they've done. The floor is red. Then, a sound, small, a breath. Andy's eyes snap open, not groggy, not disoriented, instantly, completely present. Around her, the same thing is happening to the others. The gunshot wounds are visibly changing, closing, the damage reversing itself in a way that the human eye can track, but the human brain refuses to process. Booker rolls onto his side. Joe and Nikki stir. The soldiers who killed them 30 seconds ago are looking at something that doesn't fit anywhere in their understanding of how the world works. Andy stands up. Her hand goes to the axe at her back, an ancient weapon called labris, older than the nations that currently claim the land she's standing on, and her face holds an expression that might be fury if it weren't so bone-tired. Like a person who has had this exact morning too many times. The fight that follows is one of the most distinctly non-Hollywood action sequences in recent memory, and that's precisely what makes it hit. Andy doesn't fight like someone performing for an audience. She fights like someone who has been ending armed confrontations in close quarters since long before gunpowder existed. The efficiency borders on clinical. Every movement serves exactly one purpose and then stops. The labris moves through the space with the kind of certainty that comes from having done this 10,000 times before. Joe and Nikki, despite being newly resurrected seconds ago, move with the same fluency, a machine with 4 parts that's been running without interruption for centuries. The soldiers don't stand a chance. Here's the thing though, here's what the camera doesn't let you miss even while the blood is flying. Up above, drone footage, remote feeds, cameras positioned throughout the surrounding area before Andy's team ever arrived. James Copley, somewhere safe, watching all of it on a screen. The deaths, the regenerations, every second of the aftermath, recording all of it. There were never any kidnapped girls. Copley built this. The whole scenario, the urgency, the moral pressure, the reasons that specifically convinced Andy to break her own rule, engineered from the start as a setup. Not to kill them, you can't kill them, but to document them. To get clean, undeniable footage of 4 people dying and coming back so he could take that footage somewhere. Where? Why? That answer is hours away yet. But the shape of it carries a specific kind of dread. Because Copley is careful and connected and clearly motivated by something more than money. Andy figures out the betrayal fast. The absence of hostages. the number and positioning of soldiers, the cameras. It adds up in seconds. The look on her face when it does isn't rage. It's something quieter and harder. The recognition of someone who knew, somewhere underneath all of it, that this job was wrong and took it anyway, and now has to live with what that cost. Thousands of miles away, in a completely different theater of war, another life is about to change forever. Afghanistan. Nile Freeman is a U.S. Marine on patrol. KiKi Layne, who plays her with a groundedness that this role absolutely requires. Nile is good at her job. Not flashy, not reckless, the kind of competent that earns quiet respect from the people around her. She's a soldier first and everything else second, which is exactly the kind of person you want watching your flank. During an engagement, a combatant gets inside her perimeter. Close enough. A blade finds her throat. The cut is deep. Career ending, by which I mean life ending. Nile doesn't die. The wound seals. Fast. Visible. Her teammates are standing there watching it happen, and there's no framework on Earth that makes this acceptable information. Nile's hands go to her own throat, touching the place where the cut should be. The blood still wet on her uniform, but the wound already gone. The expression KiKi Layne holds in this moment is the entire movie in miniature, not screaming, not breaking down. Just a very specific, very quiet terror. The kind that comes with knowing, on some fundamental level, that your understanding of yourself has just been taken away and you have no idea what's going to replace it. She gets pulled from active duty, isolated, questioned. The institution doesn't know what to do with someone who survived something that should have killed them, so it defaults to treating her like a liability, an anomaly to be assessed, rather than a person to be helped. The military is very good at processes and very bad at this particular kind of situation. That night, Nile dreams. 4 strangers. She's never met them, never been to the places she glimpses around them. But in the logic of the dream, there's no confusion. They look at each other across whatever distance the mind creates, and there's recognition, not personal familiarity, something deeper than that. The recognition of finding before either side has words for what means. She wakes up disturbed and unsettled in a way that the throat healing didn't quite achieve. Back in Morocco, Andy and Booker bolt upright from the same shared vision at the same moment. A new face. Someone new. Andy has been through this before. The dreams are the first contact. How a new immortal's existence reaches out to others like them before the person even understands what they are. She's seen this face. She knows what it means, and you can see, in just the way Charlize sets her jaw and moves to gather her things, that she knows exactly how heavy the conversation ahead is going to be. Because finding a new immortal and telling them what they are means taking away every ordinary future they thought they still had. There's no version of this that's kind. There's no gift wrapping for you're never going to age, you can't die, and everyone you love is going to leave you one by one forever. Andy goes anyway. Because what else do you do? The wound is gone, but the blood is still on her collar. That detail matters. Nile Freeman is sitting in a small, fluorescent room somewhere on the base, the kind of room that has been used for uncomfortable conversations about things that can't be officially reported, and the cut on her throat is completely sealed. Smooth skin where there should be stitched tissue and drainage tubes and a surgeon's careful work. But the blood soaked into her uniform is real. Dried now, darkened to brown at the edges. You can't fake that, can't explain it away. And the people on the other side of that table absolutely cannot figure out what to do with the gap between what they're seeing and what the laws of biology permit. Nile sits through the questions. How do you feel? Fine. Does anything hurt? No. Can you explain what happened? No. Do you have any previous medical history that might? No. 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 KiKi Layne doesn't play this as someone shutting down under pressure. Nile's not going cold or retreating inward the way some characters do when they're scared. She answers the questions. She cooperates. What she's doing underneath that cooperation is thinking. Hard. Turning the problem over the same way you'd examine a piece of machinery that shouldn't be possible. Looking for the mechanism, the explanation, the rational thread she can pull to make this resolve into something manageable. There isn't one. And she knows it. What makes Nile interesting from the very beginning is what the movie tells you about her before any of this happened. She's sharp, the kind of sharp that reads a room in under 10 seconds and adjusts accordingly. She joined the Marines not as an escape or for lack of other options, but because it fit, because structure suits her, because she's someone who wants to be useful in ways that are concrete and measurable, not abstract. Her father was military. That connection runs deep, part of her sense of self in ways she probably couldn't fully articulate if you asked. She had a life. Plans, in the loose way that people who do dangerous work make plans, not specific timelines, but a general shape of a future, things she was working toward, people she was going back to. The throat thing has complicated all of that. 48 hours after the incident, the military still doesn't know what to classify her as. That's the problem with genuinely inexplicable medical anomalies when they happen to active personnel. The institution runs on categories, and Nile doesn't fit any of them. She's not injured, she's not sick, she's not malingering. The base doctor who examined her filed a report so carefully worded it, essentially said nothing, while technically saying everything. Anomalous recovery. Further observation recommended. Which is bureaucratic language for, we have no idea, and we're hoping someone with more authority than us will handle it. She gets moved to a smaller room, given food, a change of clothes, nothing to do. The waiting is its own particular kind of torture for someone built like Nile. Stillness isn't her natural state. She's a person who processes through action, and right now, action isn't available. The dreams come back during the first nap she manages to get. More vivid this time. The 4 strangers from the night before are sharper at the edges, more present. One of them, a woman with dark hair and a face that carries centuries in its expression, looks directly at her with the calm of someone who has been waiting for this moment for a while and is no longer surprised by it. Around them, the visual logic of a dream shifts and rolls, sand, then stone, then a field she doesn't recognize, then dark water. The feeling isn't fear. Not quite. It's the nauseating, vertiginous sensation of knowing you're on the edge of something you can't come back from. She wakes up, heart pounding. The room hasn't changed. The fluorescent light hums. Somewhere down the corridor, footsteps move past, then fade. Nile sits up and presses her palms against her eyes, and you can see the moment she makes a decision. Not the big decision, not the one that will define the rest of whatever her life has just become. Just the small, immediate one. She's going to stop waiting for someone else to explain this to her. If an explanation exists, she's going to go find it herself. She won't get the chance. Back in Morocco, Andy is moving. The dream wasn't subtle. The timing wasn't ambiguous. A new immortal has emerged. A young one, disoriented, no framework for what she's become, already surrounded by institutional eyes. That's bad on multiple levels. Institutions document. Institutions report upward. American military. She'll be isolated by now, questioned, watched. Booker asks if they should wait. Andy says no, and Booker lets it go because he's known Andy long enough to understand that there's a version of no that means she's calculating risk, and a version that means she's already decided and the conversation is over. This is the second one. There's something else operating here, though. Something Andy doesn't say out loud, but that Charlize lets you see in the moments between her words. Andy has lived long enough to remember every time a new immortal was found too late, or found by the wrong people, or not found at all. Quinn, her closest companion for centuries, the one who was taken and sealed in an Iron Maiden and thrown into the ocean, was found correctly once, before, and that didn't protect her. The weight of that failure sits on Andy like something physical. She won't let another one go unseen. She leaves, alone. Joe and Nikki aren't happy about it. Joe especially has a specific expressive capability with his face that communicates entire paragraphs of objection in under 2 seconds. But this is Andy's call to make, and they know it. The base at night is quieter but not empty. American military installations have their own rhythms of activity, and Nile has mapped this one in the past 48 hours of involuntary observation, the way any trained soldier maps their immediate environment. Exits, guard schedules, the pattern of footsteps down her corridor. She's not planning to run. Not yet. She's just aware. Old habit. In person, the woman from the dream is simultaneously exactly what Nile expected and completely different. The dream gave her the face, but not the weight behind it. Not the way she fills the doorway like someone for whom danger is just furniture. Neutral, expected, arranged around her life rather than interrupting it. Nile doesn't freeze. That says a lot about her. "You need to come with me," Andy says. And the delivery is Charlize at her most stripped down. No warmth, no performance, no attempt to make this feel safe. It's a statement of fact from someone who is not accustomed to having her statements of fact challenged. Nile says no, which is the only correct response, honestly. A stranger materializes in your locked room in the middle of the night on a military base and tells you to follow her. You say no. You're not stupid. Whatever is happening with your throat and your dreams and the four faces you keep seeing, you're still a Marine. You're still trained, and you're still standing on ground where you have institutional backing, and this woman does not. Andy expected no. She takes it with the patience of someone who has had this conversation before, in different configurations, across different centuries. She starts talking. What she has to say takes about 90 seconds and contains information that Nile cannot process in real time. Not because she's slow, because some information is genuinely too large to absorb standing up in a dark room in the middle of the night. You're immortal. You've always been immortal. You just didn't know yet. The people in your dreams are real and they're like you. This is the rest of your life. All of it. Forever. Nile stares at her. Show me, she says. Andy does. The exact nature of what she shows Nile in this moment, what constitutes sufficient proof, what breaks through the denial faster than anything verbal could, is something I love about how this film handles the scene. It doesn't drag it out. It doesn't turn it into an extended debate. The proof is simple and undeniable and physical, and the expression on KiKi Layne's face when it registers is one of the best pieces of acting in the film. A person watching the last version of her world that made sense get quietly dismantled. Then the alarms go off. Someone found the door. Someone counted the bodies Andy had to put down to get this far into the base. The institutional machinery is spinning up, and the window they had for a clean exit just closed. Andy grabs her. Nile pulls back. The thing is, and this matters, Nile's resistance at this point isn't simple fear, it's principled. She doesn't know this woman, she doesn't know where she'd be going or what she'd be agreeing to. She has teammates on this base, people who will be asking questions about where she went. She has a brother she hasn't called in 3 weeks. She has a life, however complicated that life has just gotten, and a stranger in the dark is asking her to abandon all of it on 90 seconds of impossible proof and an implication that she no longer has a choice. Andy doesn't argue. She just moves, pulling Nile with her because the alarms are getting louder and the time for philosophical processing has officially passed. What follows is controlled chaos, the kind that soldiers are trained for and that Andy has been operating in, without exaggeration, for millennia. She doesn't move like someone panicking, already adapting. You watch her doing it in real time, the military training clicking into a different register, shifting from crisis response to tactical assessment. Okay, this is the situation. These are the variables. What do I need to know to survive this? She doesn't have nearly enough information yet. Neither does the audience, honestly. Webbing strapped across equipment pallets, the constant deep-throated roar of engines that communicate exactly one message. You are at altitude, far from the ground, and the aircraft does not care about your problems. Military personnel ride in these things with the resigned endurance of people who've learned to sleep in uncomfortable positions. Helmets back, arms folded, brains switched to standby until arrival. Andy gets Nile onto the plane under circumstances that don't involve consent or paperwork, which creates a situation. Nile has been processing everything that's happened in the past 4 hours. The room, the revelation, the base alarm, the vehicle, the dark road, and now this, with the systematic focus of someone who refuses to let shock eat her alive. She's trained for high-stress environments. She's trained to keep functioning when her body wants to stop. What she's not trained for, and what no amount of USMC preparation could have remotely prepared her for, is the specific experience of being alive when biology says she shouldn't be. And now this woman, this impossible stranger who broke into a military installation like it was a minor inconvenience, is sitting across from her at altitude, watching her with the patience of someone who has literally all the time in the world, which turns out to be not a metaphor. You said France, Nile says. I did. You didn't say anything about a military aircraft. Would it have mattered? Nile considers this. It would not have mattered. That's the annoying part. The method of transit is not the issue here. She tries a different angle. Then, Nile does what any reasonable person would do when they're on an unauthorized flight with someone they met 3 hours ago under extraordinary circumstances. She decides she's getting off this plane. She's trained for close quarters combat. So is Andy. The difference is roughly 3,000 years of practice. 3 seconds. That's how long the initial exchange lasts before Nile realizes she's dealing with something completely outside her frame of reference. The speed is wrong. The angles are wrong. Andy moves through Nile's trained responses the way water moves through a cracked dam, not by brute force, but by finding every gap, every fraction of a second where the technique leaves an opening, and being there before Nile's muscle memory can close it. Nile adapts fast. Andy gets knocked back hard at one point, into the fuselage, a blow that carries real force behind it. Nile's full commitment, the kind of hit that leads damage. Andy takes it, registers it, and comes back. Not invulnerable, not impervious. She gets hurt. She just doesn't stay hurt. Watch the moment Nile clocks this. She lands something solid, a strike that should end the exchange, that would have ended the exchange with any other opponent. Andy staggers, goes down briefly, and then gets up with a mildly irritated expression, the way you'd look if someone knocked your coffee off the table, because at this point in Andy's lifespan, this kind of damage registers as approximately that significant. Nile stops. Not because she gives up, because she's smart enough to recognize a variable she can't fight through. She stands there in the swaying cargo hold, breathing hard, and she looks at Andy, really looks, and does the math. The math comes out the same way it does for everyone who eventually has this realization. You can't kill her. You can try, and you can commit, and you can put everything you have behind it, and it won't work. The fight doesn't end cleanly. There's a moment, and this is the one that has burned into everyone who's seen this film, where Nile goes out the aircraft door, 400 feet. The ground from that altitude arrives fast. Because of course she does. She's done more dramatic versions of this before. The look she gives Nile when she lands isn't triumphant. That's what I keep coming back to with Charlize's performance in these scenes. There's no "I told you so" in it, no satisfaction, just acknowledgement. The same acknowledgement you'd give someone who just learned something that can't be unlearned and now has to figure out what to do with it. Feel better? Andy asks. Nile stares at her. And for a long moment, she doesn't say anything because there aren't words that fit. The fall was real. The not dying was real. The woman standing in front of her has been watching people make this exact face for longer than written history and still shows up anyway. No, Nile says eventually. You will, Andy says. Eventually. France arrives in early morning light. Safe houses run by Andy's team are not, it turns out, the elaborate tactical installations you might expect from people who've been doing this across centuries. The one in France is functional, a building with thick walls and good sightlines and enough distance from neighbors that a conversation at full volume doesn't carry. It has the particular quality of a space that's been lived in at intervals, stocked but not cozy, used but not personalized, a place for passing through, not staying. Booker is waiting. He opens the door before they reach it, which means he's been watching the approach, which means he's been exactly as worried about this extraction as his calm posture suggests he hasn't been. His eyes go to Nile first, assessing, measuring, settling on something that might be sympathy if it weren't so carefully tamped down, and then to Andy with a question built into the silence. Andy shakes her head slightly. The question, whatever it was, gets filed away for later. Then Joe comes around the corner from the kitchen and the energy in the room shifts. Joe takes up space the way a fire takes up space. Warmth radiating outward, presence that expands to fill whatever he walks into. He takes one look at Nile, and his face does something generous and immediate. Marwan Kenzari doesn't play this as performance. Joe genuinely feels things and doesn't see the point in pretending he doesn't. He's been through the experience of being new and lost and utterly without a framework, and that memory hasn't gone anywhere. Welcome, he says, and means it. Nile, still processing the fall in the fight and the fact that her hands are completely steady when they really shouldn't be, looks at him for a moment. You were in my dream, she says. We all were, he says. Come in. Eat something. Nikki appears in the background, quiet where Joe is loud, watching the doorway with attentive dark eyes. He nods once at Nile. Not unfriendly, just economical. 2 sentences with Nikki would carry the same content as 10 with most other people. He's been like this for about 800 years and sees no reason to change. The 4 of them around the table, Andy, Booker, Joe, Nikki, and now Nile making 5, is the first moment the movie lets you breathe. The action stops. The chase stops. There's bread on the table, something warm to drink, and the mundane comfort of people sitting down together after a hard few hours. Nile doesn't relax, but she watches. She watches the way Joe automatically cuts Nikki's bread before his own, the way Booker wraps both hands around his cup and stares at a point 3 inches in front of him when he's thinking. The way Andy sits with her back to the wall, old instinct, ancient instinct, and surveys the room at intervals without making it visible. These are people who have been alive long enough that their personalities have fully crystallized. They're not still becoming who they are. They arrived a long time ago. How old are you? Nile asks Andy. Andy takes a breath. Old. How old? You'll lose track of the centuries, Booker says. Not unkindly, just accurately. How do you... Nile stops, restarts. How do you stand it? The table goes quiet in a way that carries history in it. Joe looks at his hands. Nikki looks at Joe. Booker looks at nothing in particular. Andy looks directly at Nile with an expression that won't commit to being readable. Some days better than others, Andy says. It's not a reassuring answer. It's the true one. And Nile, who has already demonstrated the pattern that will define her across this whole story, the refusal to accept comfortable lies when the real answer is available, accepts it with a small nod. She's not okay. Nobody's pretending she's okay, but she's sitting at the table, and the bread is real, and the people across from her have somehow survived the same moment of impossible reckoning and come out the other side functional. And right now, that's enough to keep moving. There's a specific thing the old guard does in these early safe house scenes that takes a second viewing to fully appreciate. It establishes the group dynamic not through exposition, but through behavior. Nobody sits down and delivers a speech about who they are and what the team means to them. Instead, it's the small logistics. Who makes the coffee? Who takes watch? Who Joe touches on the shoulder when passing? That tell you everything about what these relationships have become across time. Andy and Booker move around each other with the friction of two people who genuinely respect each other and also genuinely disagree about something fundamental, something they've been not quite arguing about for long enough that it's just become the texture of their relationship. Joe and Nikki are a single unit, not in the sense of having no individual identity, but in the sense of two things that have reached equilibrium, separate elements that found their stable configuration and held it. And Nile is the variable, the new element introduced into a system that's been running the same way for a very, very long time. She asks questions, good ones. The kind that cut past the surface details to the things that actually matter. What are the limits? What changes? What stays the same? Can you get sick? Can you go crazy? Does it hurt every time? The answers come in fragments, from different people in different tones. Joe with warmth, Nikki with precision, Booker with a flatness that hints at things he's not saying, Andy with the careful honesty of someone who has decided that sugarcoating this helps nobody. Yes, it hurts every time. No, you don't get used to it. You get used to getting back up. Those are different things. Nile absorbs all of this with the focus of someone memorizing a field manual. Processing, filing, holding the emotional response at arm's length until she has enough information to know what the emotional response should be. She's exhausted. She doesn't say so. She doesn't sleep. Outside, the French countryside sits in the early gray of morning. Inside, the oldest people on Earth are drinking coffee around a table with the newest one, and somewhere across the continent, events are already moving that none of them know about yet. The quiet won't last long. It never does. Rain against the safe house windows. Nile can't sleep. Nobody seems to expect her to. The others have settled into the quiet rhythms of people who've learned to rest in pieces. Nikki with his eyes closed in the corner chair, possibly asleep, possibly not. Joe reading something dog-eared and well-worn. Andy standing at the window with a cup that went cold 20 minutes ago, watching the wet road outside with the focused attention of someone running calculations. Booker is the one who sits with Nile. He doesn't announce it, doesn't make a project of it. He simply refills his own cup, pulls a chair to the same angle as hers, and sits down. The message is, you don't have to talk, but you don't have to be alone with it either. For someone managing his own private devastation, something Nile can't name yet but can feel radiating off him like heat, it's a generous thing to do. Ask yourself something, he says eventually. She looks at him. What's the worst part? Right now, the one thing that's sitting heaviest. Nile thinks about it honestly, not the fall, not the healing, not even the revelation itself. My brother, she says. He doesn't know where I am. Booker nods slowly. Like someone who has heard exactly this answer before in different voices across different centuries and never found a response that makes it better. That part, he says, doesn't go away. It's not comfort, but it's honest. And Nile, who established in the very first moments of her screen time that she'd rather have the true answer than the kind one, accepts it with a long exhale and wraps both hands around her cup the same way Booker does with his. They sit in the rain sound and the low light, and gradually, the way these things happen when the situation relaxes by degrees, the others begin to talk. 800 years is a long time to hold a grudge. Joe starts here. Not performing the story, not reciting it, telling it the way people tell things they've lived, with the casual confidence of someone who doesn't need to check notes. His voice has warmth built into its structure, even when the content is rough. His name was Yusuf al-Qassani. He was a soldier. A good one, committed to his faith and his cause in the way that soldiers of that era were committed, completely, without the modern luxury of moral relativism. He fought in the Crusades. On one particular day, in one particular engagement, he came face to face with a Genoese soldier on the other side of the line. His name was Niccolò di Genova. They killed each other. That's not a metaphor. Not a near miss, not a dramatic injury. They killed each other, weapons finding their marks, bodies going down, both of them waking up confused in the same field with the same impossible fact in front of them. The man who just killed you is staring back at you, equally alive, equally bewildered. They killed each other again. Different day, different engagement, same field, same result. And again. By the third or fourth time, Joe is vague on the exact number, and you get the impression he's vague on purpose because the precise count is beside the point. Something had shifted. The theological framework that made killing each other make sense had been thoroughly undermined by the practical reality of neither of them staying dead. The war continued around them. Their respective sides continued their respective agendas. And the two of them began, with the reluctant pragmatism of soldiers who respect competence even in enemies, to talk. They had a lot in common, more than the obvious. Similar backgrounds in certain ways, similar values underneath the surface-level differences that their respective societies had spent years telling them were fundamental, similar senses of humor. Dark, dry, the kind that develops in people who deal regularly with violence and find laughter the only viable alternative to madness. Nicky, from his corner chair, adds nothing to this story. He doesn't need to. His face adds everything. The small, private satisfaction of someone listening to their own life being described by the person who knows it best. He's the reason I'm still. Joe pauses, searches. Still interested, he lands on with a gesture that means, in any of it, in the world, in continuing. After this long, the world repeats itself. Empires do the same things. Empires always did. People make the same mistakes. But he's always, another gesture, this one toward Nicky, helpless and fond, new, to me, still, rain on the windows. Nile looks at Nicky, who is looking at Joe with an expression that contains 8 centuries in it. How do you not? She stops, starts again. How do you not get tired of each other? Joe considers this with the seriousness the question deserves. We do, he says, sometimes. But tired of each other and tired of the world are different things. One of them is just Tuesday. The other one, he shakes his head, the other one is what we're trying not to become. Booker's story comes out differently, quieter, without the warmth Joe brings to almost everything he touches. He became what he is around the turn of the 19th century. The exact mechanics of it don't matter. What matters is the aftermath. He had a family, wife, sons, the life that men of his era and station were supposed to want, and that Booker, unlike many of them, had actually wanted. Genuinely. A house, people he loved, a future with a recognizable shape. He didn't age, his wife did, his sons did. He watched them all move through the years he was locked out of, watched the lines find his wife's face, watched his sons grow old past him, watched the people who were supposed to share his life become strangers to the version of him that never changed. He buried them, all of them. But grief, real grief, doesn't work on a schedule. It doesn't compress because you've had centuries to process it. Booker has had 200 years to process losing his family, and the wound is as accessible as the day it was made. Maybe more so, because 200 years of carrying something gives it time to go deep, to work its way into the structure of you until you can't separate the grief from the person anymore. Matthias Schoenaerts carries all of this in the spaces between Booker's sentences. The flatness that occasionally crosses his face isn't absence. It's the expression of someone who has pushed something down so many times that the pushing has become involuntary. He functions. He's excellent at what he does. And underneath the excellence, underneath the competence, there is something running on fumes. Nile is quiet for a moment after this. Does it get better? She asks. Not about her own situation, about his. The shift in who's asking and who needs something lands in the room with weight. Booker looks at his cup. It gets different, he says. Better is. He shakes his head. I'll let you know. Andy doesn't offer her story in the same way. She never does. What comes out, in fragments over time, the way you assemble a picture from pieces distributed across different conversations, is this: she is ancient in a way that makes Booker's 2 centuries look like an afternoon. She predates the Roman Empire. She predates most of the institutions and belief systems and national identities that currently organize the world. She has watched civilizations build themselves up, reach their peaks, collapse into rubble, and be forgotten. The rubble she's walked through has sometimes become the foundation for the next thing, which eventually collapsed into rubble for someone else to walk through. She carries her weapon, the labries, the double-headed axe, from an era so far back that the culture that made it no longer has a name that most people would recognize. It's not a prop, not an affectation. It's the one object continuous with who she was before all of this, the thread back to a self that existed before centuries of loss calcified into the woman who sits at windows watching wet roads. What she doesn't say, not here, not yet, is that the healing has stopped. The wound from South Sudan, the one that should have been gone within minutes of being made, it's still there. Something has changed in her biology, or whatever the word is for the mechanism that has been running without interruption for however many thousand years she's been alive. She noticed it in South Sudan. She's been noticing it since. She hasn't told anyone. This is a performance of normalcy so practiced you'd have to know her very well to catch the gap. Joe and Nikki probably don't know yet. Booker might suspect. Nile certainly doesn't know. But if you watch Charlize carefully in the safe house scenes, there's a particular care in how Andy positions herself. A slight guardedness about the wounded side that isn't consistent with someone who heals. A person moving around a thing she hasn't decided how to name. Then someone says the name Quinn. The room changes. Not dramatically, no music cue, no visible flinch from Andy, just a settling of quality in the air, the way a room feels different when something heavy gets placed in the center of it. Quinn was Andy's closest companion, or first, in many ways, the person who found Andy, or who Andy found after the initial shock of what she was, when the world was smaller and older, and having even one other person who understood your situation was everything. They were together for centuries, fought together, survived together, watched empires fall together. The relationship between them was the kind that only forms between people who have been through enough that ordinary friendship language doesn't quite cover it. They were captured. Somewhere in early modern Europe, the exact era is vague, but the context makes it clear it was a time when witch was a functional accusation with concrete consequences, church authorities, a tribunal of some kind. People deeply certain of their righteousness and deeply threatened by women who refused to die when properly killed. Quinn and Andy were subjected to every test available. They survived every one. This was not evidence of innocence to their captors. It was evidence of exactly what had been suspected. Andy was thrown into the sea. She drowned, revived, until the tide and the time worked in her favor and she eventually got free. Quinn was put in an Iron Maiden and thrown into the ocean. She's still there. She drowns. She comes back. She drowns again. Has been doing this alone in the dark at the bottom of the ocean for hundreds of years. No rescue has come. No rescue is possible with the technology currently available. The ocean is vast, the specific location lost with the people who knew it, and even if those problems were solvable, the Iron Maiden is a sealed container at crushing depth. The silence after this information settles on Nile like something physical. She has had a long night. She has learned things about herself that have dismantled her understanding of what her life is. She has fought an immortal woman on a military transport plane, fallen 400 feet, healed, and sat in a safe house in France being told the history of people she'll apparently know for the rest of forever. And now, this. Somewhere at the bottom of the ocean, there is a woman, ancient, powerful, someone who has survived things that would have destroyed anyone else, doing the worst thing imaginable on an infinite loop, alone, has been since before living memory. Does she dream? Nile asks. Her voice is steady. The question is not. Nobody answers, which is its own answer. Nile had been bracing, unconsciously, throughout the whole night, for the part of the story where the immortality becomes okay, where the compensation reveals itself clearly enough that the math makes sense. You lose everything, yes, but you gain this, and the scales balance. Every story has that structure. It's how people endure hard information. The old guard doesn't offer her that. Andy looks at her from across the table. Charlize holding a stillness that contains everything she won't say, and what passes between them in that look is the truest thing the film has offered yet. There is no scale, there is no balance, there is only the choice, made or not made, to keep going anyway. Outside, the rain hasn't stopped. The road is still wet and dark. The world is still moving, turning, generating the next crisis and the one after that. Somewhere in London, a pharmaceutical executive is reviewing surveillance footage of 4 people returning from the dead with the focused satisfaction of someone who has just confirmed a very profitable theory. None of them know about him yet. They have maybe 1 more hour of this quiet. Stephen Merrick is not what you'd picture. When a film sets up a pharmaceutical villain, someone whose plan involves capturing immortal people and harvesting their biology for profit, there's a version of that character who wears it obviously. The slick suit, the practiced menace, the cold eyes that signal danger from across the room so you know exactly where to point your fear. Merrick, played by Harry Melling, is none of that. He's young, boyish even, soft-faced in a way that reads as harmless right up until he opens his mouth, and you realize the harmlessness is just inexperience wearing the costume of innocence. He got wealthy early and got there fast, which means he never had the period most powerful people have where the world pushes back hard enough to teach them proportionality. He wants things, he gets them. The gap between wanting and getting has never been wide enough to build character in. He's excited is the thing. Genuinely, transparently excited. Not malevolent in the way of someone who has wrestled with the ethics and chosen wrong. Malevolent in the way of someone for whom the ethical dimension hasn't fully loaded yet, because the scientific and financial possibilities are taking up all available processing space. James Copley sits across from him and watches the footage play. Footage doesn't lie. That's the argument Copley has been building. The empirical case, the documentation, the clean, undeniable visual evidence of 4 people absorbing fatal damage and returning from it. He spent years on this. The South Sudan setup was the final piece, clear footage, multiple angles, no room for the explanations that rational minds reach for when confronted with the impossible. The footage plays. Merrick watches without blinking. Here's where Chiwetel Ejiofor does something subtle that pays off enormously later. Copley presents this evidence with the manner of someone who has rehearsed it, the professional composure of a man making a pitch he's confident in. But watch the eyes. There's a quality there that doesn't match pure professionalism, something personal in how he watches Merrick watch the screen. Some question he's waiting to have answered that isn't about the science. Merrick asks the obvious questions first, the practical ones. How many of them are there? How long have they been operating? What's the range of their regenerative capability? He wants parameters. He wants to understand the limits of the thing so he can figure out the limits of what it can produce. Copley answers what he knows, withholds what he suspects. Imagine what we could do, Merrick says, and stops, because for him, the sentence is complete. Imagine what we could do is both the question and the answer, the ethical framework and the business plan, all collapsed into 4 words that contain no uncertainty whatsoever. He means it as a positive statement. Genuinely, in his understanding of himself and his work, he is the good version of this story. The scientist entrepreneur who sees what others have missed, who has the resources and the will to turn a discovery into something that helps people. He has probably given this speech to investors. He has probably given this speech to himself. The helping people part is real to him. It just isn't the part that drives the machinery. $300 million is what Merrick Pharmaceuticals has spent on longevity research through conventional means in the past decade. All of it, suddenly, unnecessary. Find them, he tells Copley. All of them. Outside the safe house, cold morning air. The yard behind the building is flat and gray. The overnight rain still sitting in puddles on uneven stone. Nile is out there before anyone else, which says something about her sleep situation, which is to say, there hasn't been one. Andy finds her there, carrying the labries. The training that follows isn't gentle. Andy doesn't do gentle when something real is at stake, and Nile's situation, new immortal, no combat knowledge of her own capabilities, no understanding yet of how her body performs differently now, is as real as it gets. The kindness would be to ease her in. The wisdom is to push hard enough that she finds her edges before someone else finds them for her. The axe work is first. Watching Charlize Theron handle the labries in these scenes is its own education. She carries it with zero affectation, not performing strength, not making the weapon a symbol of something. It's a tool she's been using longer than most currently spoken languages have existed. The efficiency is the point. The muscle memory is so deep it stopped being memory and became reflex somewhere around the 3rd or 4th century. Nile watches, then tries. She's strong and coordinated and picks up mechanical movements fast. The military has trained her well on that front. But there's a gap between technical competence and the kind of embodied fluency Andy has, and the gap shows. Again, Andy says. Nile goes again, adjusts, gets closer. You're thinking, Andy says. I'm learning. Thinking and learning aren't the same thing. Thinking happens before. In a fight, you're past thinking. This exchange, spare, direct, no wasted syllables, is the first real moment of something developing between them. Not warmth yet, not trust exactly. The beginning of a working relationship between two people who are sizing each other up and starting to like what the sizing reveals. Andy pushes because she sees something in Nile worth pushing. Nile pushes back because she's incapable of doing otherwise. They work through the morning. The team's debate about Copley happens over a meal that nobody is really tasting. They know someone set up South Sudan. The surveillance footage, the positioned cameras, the absence of any actual hostages. The setup was professional and deliberate and targeted specifically at them. Someone knew enough about how they operate to construct a scenario that would bypass Andy's standard precautions. That requires either very good intelligence or a very long tail of observation. Joe's position, find Copley, deal with the situation directly. Nikki's position, find Copley, understand the full picture first, then decide. Booker's position, it's already too late to contain it, and trying to contain it will make it worse. Andy's position, she listens to all of them and doesn't say which way she's leaning, which is itself a data point for the others. Nile, who wasn't there for South Sudan and whose frame of reference for all of this is approximately 48 hours old, asks the question the others have been orbiting without landing on. What's the worst case? If whoever set you up passes the footage to someone with resources, what actually happens? The table goes quiet the way it did when someone said Quinn's name. This is not a hypothetical they're comfortable sitting with. The history of what happens to people like them when they fall into the wrong hands is not abstract. They've lived versions of it. The witch hunters who took Quinn had no technology, no institutional infrastructure, no global network of resources. What someone with 21st century pharmaceutical capabilities and genuine financial motivation could do is a different order of problem entirely. We'd be studied, Booker says, flat, clinical, like he's describing something that already happened. For how long? Nile asks. Nobody answers, because the answer is indefinitely. You can't die. They can't run out of research to do. There is no natural endpoint to the experiment. Nile processes this with her characteristic stillness, the kind that isn't passive, that is in fact the opposite of passive, the silence of a brain running very fast in a very quiet room. She looks at Andy. That's what happened to Quinn, she says. Not a question. A version of it, Andy says. Though, this has always been the risk. This has always been the risk, Andy confirms. What the old guard is doing in these middle sections, and this is the part I didn't fully appreciate the first time through, is building two parallel tracks that are moving toward each other. On one side, a group of people who have survived centuries by being invisible, whose safety has always depended on the world not knowing what they are. On the other, a man with unlimited resources who now has proof of what they are and every incentive in the world to act on it. The collision is inevitable. The only variable is how it arrives and who's prepared. Merrick moves faster than they expect. His operatives are good, not immortal good, but professional and numerous and equipped with specific intelligence about the safe house location that they shouldn't have. How did they get it? The team doesn't know yet. The answer to that question is sitting in the room with them, wearing the expression of someone managing a secret, and they don't know that yet either. Nile pushes herself through 2 more hours of training after the meal conversation. She's working something out physically that she can't resolve mentally. The relentlessness of it, the sense that the ceiling keeps raising, that no matter how competent she gets, there's always another 800 years of experience above her head. Andy watches her from the doorway at one point, and the expression on her face, not quite pride, not quite recognition, somewhere between the two, is one of the better unguarded moments the film gives Charlize. Andy has been doing this for so long that the newness burned out of it before most currently existing nations were founded. But Nile still has it, the genuine frustration of someone who wants to be better than she currently is, who pushes because improvement feels like it means something. Andy remembers that feeling. Distantly. The way you remember a room you lived in as a child, you know it existed, you can describe it in broad strokes, but the actual texture of it has gone soft with time. Nile punches the practice target until her knuckles split, watches them seal. Does it again? Night. Opley's location has been narrowed down. Booker has a contact, a thread of intelligence that puts him at a specific address in the region. The plan, loose, not fully committed to yet, is to go to Copley, understand what he passed on and to whom, and make decisions from there. It's not a good plan in the way that plans with clean lines and clear outcomes are good. It's the plan available with the information on hand, which is how most real decisions get made. Nile asks if she's coming. Andy says yes, then pauses. Then says, "You stay near me," not because Nile can't handle herself. Both of them know, after a morning of hard training, that she can handle herself considerably. It's something else. The instinct, maybe, of someone who has lost enough people that the reflex to keep the newest one close has been worn into the bone. Nile agrees without making an issue of it. The team moves toward the door. Outside, the road is dry now, the overnight rain gone, the sky doing something dramatic with clouds that doesn't mean anything except weather, beautiful and indifferent. Joe and Nikki fall into their natural position, side by side, a small adjustment in posture that shifts them from relaxed to operational without any visible transition point. Booker checks something on his phone. His face in the screen light is unreadable. He knows something they don't. He has known it for a while. The first window blows inward at 2 a.m. Not a knock, not a warning. The glass comes in as a single explosive event and the team is moving before the sound finishes, because people who have been doing this for centuries don't have the half-second processing delay that gets ordinary soldiers killed in the first moments of an ambush. The instinct is older than any training program. It's deeper than reflex. It's what's left after you've been ambushed enough times that your body treats surprise as just another variable to route around. Andy is up and armed. Joe and Nikki split without speaking. They've run enough situations together that the geometry is automatic, each taking an angle that covers the other's blind spot without either of them needing to communicate the decision. Nile, despite being 48 hours into her new reality, moves fast and correctly. Booker goes for the back of the building. The first wave comes through the windows and the doors simultaneously. 14. That's the count as best the team can assess in the first 30 seconds of chaos. 14 operatives, well-equipped, tactically coordinated in the way that requires either military background or very serious private training. This isn't a police action. This isn't an improvised grab attempt. Someone who knows what they're doing planned this specific operation with specific intelligence about this specific location. The fight through the safe house is brutal in the way that real close-quarters combat is brutal. Ugly and fast and not even slightly cinematic. Furniture becomes an obstacle course. Doorways become choke points. The rooms that felt functional and sized right for living feel crushingly small when they're full of people trying to kill each other. Andy moves through it with the axe and a pistol in a combination that shouldn't work, and does. The two weapons alternating with the fluency of someone who stopped thinking about technique so long ago that technique is now just physics. Nile holds her corner. More than holds it. She's good, and the morning's training has keyed her into something she hadn't fully accessed before. The freedom of knowing the consequences of being hit have changed. Not recklessness, not stupidity, something more like the particular confidence of a fighter who no longer has to protect their body at the expense of their attack. She moves forward where, before, she might have covered. It makes her more dangerous than the opposition expects. Joe and Nikki work the middle of the building together, and watching them in a real operational situation, not training, not a controlled demonstration, but actual coordinated violence under pressure, is something else entirely. The shorthand they've developed isn't just emotional, it's tactical. They share sight lines. They know without looking where the other one is at every moment. A threat that focuses on one of them has, without realizing it, turned its back on the other. For about 90 seconds, the team is winning. Then the second wave, more vehicles outside, more operatives, and these ones aren't coming in through windows. They're coming in through the walls, through the ceiling, through angles the first wave was designed to push the team toward. The first 14 weren't meant to win. They were meant to position. Andy catches this a beat too late. They all do. A grenade rolls across the floor, not toward the center of the room, toward Booker specifically, calculated placement, and Booker sees it and moves, but not quite fast enough. The blast catches him at the edge of its radius, which is enough. It goes down hard, and the damage is the kind that doesn't just sting, shrapnel, burns, the category of injury that takes even an immortal time to work through. He's out of the fight, not dead, obviously not dead, but the regeneration process for this volume of trauma takes minutes, and minutes in a firefight this size is approximately forever. The math shifts. Joe goes down next. Not from a fatal hit, but from the sheer weight of numbers. 6 operatives converging with the specific coordination that suggests they've been briefed on exactly how hard he is to put down and exactly how many people it takes to do it. He fights through 3 of them before the 4th and 5th and 6th close the distance simultaneously. Nikki makes it 3 steps toward Joe before the same thing happens to him. Targeted, overwhelmed, taken, not killed, deliberately not killed. These people aren't here to kill them. They're here to take them. That realization arrives for Andy and Nile at approximately the same moment, and it changes the calculation in a way that's almost worse than a kill operation. You can fight a kill operation with full commitment. A capture operation, especially one this professionally executed, has the team at a structural disadvantage the moment they understand what they're actually dealing with. Because every escalation Andy makes, every step toward lethal force and defense, runs the risk of triggering the same escalation toward Joe and Nikki, who are now restrained and being moved toward the vehicles outside. Andy burns through 4 more operatives getting to the door. She doesn't make it in time. The vehicles are moving before she clears the threshold. Joe's face in the vehicle window, not frightened, not panicking, steady the way Joe is always steady, is the last thing visible before they turn the corner and are gone. Silence. Nile stands in the destroyed doorway of the safe house and watches the taillights disappear and lets the tactical situation reassemble itself in her head. The operatives who aren't gone are down. Booker is on the floor inside, conscious now but moving carefully, the regeneration working visibly through the damage. She can see it, can see the process the same way she felt it in her own throat, and it's still surreal even now, even knowing what she knows, to watch catastrophic injury reverse itself in real time. Andy is standing in the middle of the yard, still. Nile has seen Andy still before. The watchful stillness at the window with the cold coffee, the patient stillness during training, the deliberate stillness of someone who has decided to take up less space while they assess. This is different. This is the stillness of someone managing something internal, something that requires all available attention to keep contained. Andy. Nothing. Andy. She moves toward her. Andy turns. Her expression resets into the mode Nile is starting to recognize, the controlled professional face, everything behind it sequenced into its proper compartment. "We need to move," Andy says. "They know this location and they'll send more. Booker needs a few more minutes. We have a few more minutes, not many." Nile nods, starts moving back toward the building. She almost misses it. The way Andy holds her left side, briefly, when she thinks no one is watching, the smallest adjustment of her arm, not the casual movement of someone accommodating general post-fight soreness, the specific guarded gesture of a person protecting a wound. Nile stops, looks back. Andy has already corrected, already moved on, walking toward the building, her posture and gait communicating nothing of interest. But Nile saw it. She files it, says nothing. The thing about being immortal is it still hurts. This is not a fact, Andy explains, because Andy doesn't explain things about herself if she can avoid it. But it's the truth underlying everything about how she operates. The healing is real. The regeneration is real. What it isn't, what it has never been, is painless. Every wound that closes is a wound that was made first. You feel the making. You feel the closing. You feel everything in between. The wound from South Sudan is not closing. Andy knows before she looks down. Knew before they arrived at the safe house. If she's being completely honest with herself, which she isn't, because being honest about it requires deciding what to do about it, and she hasn't gotten there yet. The South Sudan fight left a wound in her side that should have healed within the hour. It didn't. She dressed it herself, taped it closed, said nothing. That was days ago. It's still open. She'd been immortal for so long that the absence of mortality had stopped being something she thought about, the way you stop thinking about oxygen because it's always there. The healing was just a fact of existence, a constant, a background condition of her life for thousands of years. The idea that it might stop, that the mechanism might have a limit, a duration, a point at which it simply ceased, is the kind of idea she'd categorized as theoretical, something that happened to Layne, ancient history. Except Layne stopped healing too, and then Layne died. She doesn't let herself complete that thought, not fully. Completing it requires making it real. And real things require action. And right now, action means telling someone, and telling someone means this team starts treating her differently. It means Nile, 48 hours into her new existence, loses the one anchor she has. It means Joe and Nikki, who are currently in a vehicle en route to whatever Merrick has prepared for them, would make decisions differently if they knew. Worse decisions, maybe. Decisions driven by fear for her rather than clarity about the mission. So she tapes the wound tighter, straightens her posture, and keeps moving. Booker is upright by the time they get back inside. Moving stiffly, the last of the shrapnel damage still working its way out. You can tell by the careful way he holds himself that the process isn't comfortable. He looks at the state of the safe house, looks at Andy, looks at the empty space where Joe and Nikki were. His face does something that Nile clocks even if she can't fully interpret it yet. It's not quite guilt. Guilt wears itself openly on most people, even when they're trying to hide it. It lives in the eyes, in the mouth, in the micro-expressions that come and go faster than conscious control can manage. What's on Booker's face is something more deliberate, more managed. The expression of a person who has made a decision and is now living in the aftermath of it and is maintaining, through effort, the appearance of someone who is simply processing a crisis. "They were waiting for us," he says. "Yes," Andy says. "That means," "Yes," Andy says again. The intelligence failure. Someone fed information about the safe house location to whoever planned this operation. It's the only explanation for the precision of the assault, the timing, the approach vectors, the specific tactics designed to neutralize this specific group. Merrick's people didn't stumble onto the safe house. They were sent there. Booker lets this land in the room and says nothing further. Nile looks between them, looks at Booker. The things she noticed about him in the safe house conversation, in the way he delivered information about Copley, the flatness, the careful management, is still there, a shade darker now. She doesn't know what it means yet. She knows it means something. "We need to find Copley," Andy says, "now, before this gets further." Booker says he can make some calls, get a location. Andy tells him to do it. And there it is. Both of them in the same moment carrying secrets the other doesn't know about, moving toward a confrontation that neither is fully prepared for, in a destroyed safe house in France with Joe and Nikki somewhere in a vehicle pointed toward London. Outside, the sky is doing what it's been doing all night, indifferent, enormous, moving in its own directions for its own reasons. The road where the vehicles turned is empty and dark. Nile stands in the ruined doorway and counts her exits and wonders what she just signed up for. More than she knew, obviously more than she knew. The answer, she's beginning to understand, is always more than you know. That's not specific to immortality. That's not even specific to this situation. That's just the shape of the world. You commit to something with the information available, and then the information keeps coming in. And at some point, you're too far in for the new information to change the direction. She's too far in. She knows it. She picks up her weapon. She hasn't called her brother in 3 weeks. Nile sits with that fact in the back seat of the car while Andy and Booker work out the logistics of finding Copley, the conversation happening in the front seats at a low register. She isn't trying to follow. 3 weeks since she heard Zeke's voice. He'll have called the base by now. He'll have gotten the kind of response that military families learn to dread. Vague, administrative, carefully designed to convey nothing while implying everything is fine. He's not an idiot. He knows what that kind of response usually means. She needs him to know she's alive. She doesn't ask permission. That's not how Nile Freeman operates. She tells Andy plainly that she needs to see her family before anything else happens, before Joe and Nikki are wherever they're going, before Copley is confronted, before the next crisis arrives, which given the past 48 hours is probably about an hour away. She needs 1 hour with the people she loves. Andy's first instinct is visible no, the muscle of it, the refusal already forming. Then something shifts. Maybe it's the memory of every person she's watched make this same request across the centuries. The new immortal who just needs one more contact with the life they're leaving, one more anchor before the current pulls them out. Maybe it's something else, something she won't name. She says yes. 1 hour, she says. And you don't tell them anything. Nile doesn't agree to the second part. She just gets out of the car. Chicago is 9 hours behind France by air, which is why Nile's mother opens the door in a bathrobe and her brother Zeke is half asleep on the couch when she walks in, and the look on both their faces when they see her standing there is the kind of look that doesn't have a name, because it only happens in specific moments. The face of people who had almost let themselves believe the worst and are now having to reassemble from the other direction. Nile holds her mother for a long time. She doesn't explain where she's been. She says she's okay, which is true and not true at the same time. She is fine, physically, more fine than any human being has ever been physically, but okay as a broader category is something she's still working out the definition of. She sits in the kitchen with the particular smell of her mother's house and the sound of Zeke's voice, and she tries to memorize it in a way she's never had to before, because somewhere in the back of her head the math has already run, they'll age, she won't. This kitchen will eventually be empty, and she'll still be exactly herself, and the smell won't be here anymore. She doesn't say any of this. She drinks the tea her mother makes and laughs at something Zeke says and sits in the realness of it. The uncomplicated, non-immortal realness of two people who love her and show it in the most ordinary ways imaginable. When she leaves, her mother holds her face in both hands and looks at her with the searching attention of a parent who knows something has changed and can't name what. "You're different," her mother says. "I'm okay," Nile says, which, again, is true and not true. She walks back to the car. Andy is waiting without the expression of someone who's been waiting impatiently. There's something almost gentle in it, an acknowledgement that she understood what that hour cost and what it was for, a recognition between two people who both know what it means to say goodbye to someone and not be able to say, "That's what it is." They don't speak about it. The car moves. Booker loads the clip himself. This is the detail. The one that rewires everything you've understood about the past several hours when it lands. He handles Nile's weapon during a routine equipment check outside Copley's location. Natural, professional, the kind of task that teammates do for each other as a matter of course. He hands it back. She holsters it without checking it, because why would she? He's been with them for 200 years. He's been through the safe house fight with them tonight. But we're not there yet. We're still in the part where Booker seems like one of them, fully and without question, and the thing he's carrying hasn't surfaced yet. Copley's location is a flat in the surrounding area, a working space rather than a home, the kind of address a careful operator uses when he needs somewhere to run equipment without it being traceable to his real life. Booker found it efficiently, almost too efficiently, though that thought doesn't fully form for anyone in the car. Andy goes in first. Booker follows. Nile is told to watch the perimeter. She doesn't love this arrangement, but Andy's logic is clear enough. Copley knows Andy's face. The confrontation needs to happen face to face, and having Nile visible in that first moment introduces a variable. She takes up a position outside with a sightline to the entrance and waits. Inside, Copley is exactly where the intelligence said he'd be. He doesn't run. That says something about him. Either he expected this visit eventually, or he's made a calculation that running from these particular people is a strategy with a very low ceiling. He sits at his workspace surrounded by the infrastructure of his surveillance operation. Screens, files, years of documentation laid out with the careful organization of someone who has been building a case. He's been building a case. This is where Chiwetel Ejiofor gets to deliver what the whole film has been setting up for his character, the explanation that reframes everything Copley has done from the outside as betrayal and from the inside as something more complicated. He pulls up files, his wife, medical history, a degenerative condition that conventional treatment couldn't touch, that she lived with and eventually died from while Copley watched and did everything available to him, and it wasn't enough. He's not trying to sell immortality for profit. He doesn't care about the money. He thought, genuinely, desperately thought, that Merrick's research could produce treatments, cures, that the biological mechanism that keeps Andy and her team alive could be reverse engineered into something that saves the people dying from the things medicine still can't fix. He thought he was doing something good. Andy listens to all of this with the stillness she brings to information she's still assessing. She doesn't dismiss it. She doesn't validate it. She holds it the way she holds everything she can't immediately file, carefully, without committing to a position until she knows more. "You handed us to someone," she says. "Whatever you thought you were doing, that's what you did." Copley doesn't argue. He knows what it is. "Who does Merrick have?" Andy asks. "Where are they?" He starts to answer. Then Andy goes down. One shot, Center mass, from behind, from Booker, who has crossed the room in the time it took Copley to start his answer, who has positioned himself with the specific calculation of someone who thought this through in advance. Andy hits the floor and doesn't move. The room freezes. Copley stares. Even he, who has spent years documenting these people's impossible resilience, looks at what just happened with the expression of someone whose brain is rejecting the input. Booker holds the weapon steady. Here's what Booker believed, and this is the part of the film I keep turning over, because it's not a simple villain turn. It doesn't operate that way. He believed Merrick's research could give them a way out. An ending, the thing that the immortality removed from them, the ability to finish, to stop, to simply be done, potentially restorable through whatever science could extract from their biology. He's been carrying his dead wife and dead sons for 200 years, and he is tired in a way that doesn't have a bottom, and someone offered him the possibility of an exit, and he took it. He didn't do it for money. He didn't do it out of malice toward Andy or Joe or Nikki. He did it because he's been running on empty for longer than most people can conceptualize, and the weight of continuing became more than the weight of what he was doing. That doesn't make it not a betrayal. Both things are completely true at the same time, and the film is wise enough to hold both without resolving the tension into something simpler. Booker looks down at Andy, who is still not moving, who is hit badly, whose side was already compromised before tonight, and his face is the most complicated thing Matthias Schoenaerts does in the entire film. There's grief in it. Real grief, not performance. The grief of someone who has just done an irreversible thing to a person they love and knows it and did it anyway. "I'm sorry," he says. Copley calls Merrick's people. Outside, Nile checks her phone. Nothing from Andy. Checks the entrance. Nothing visible. She shifts her position for a better angle, the instinct sharp and trained. Her hand moves to her weapon. She draws it. Not in response to anything she's seen, just the habit, the check, the reassurance of knowing what you're holding before you need it. She ejects the clip. Empty. She stares at it for a moment, ejects the chamber round. Nothing there either. Counts back through the past hour. When did she last handle her own weapon? When was the last time she confirmed the load herself? Who had access between then and now? Booker. The equipment check outside Copley's location. The professional, casual, completely unremarkable moment of one teammate handling another's gear. Empty. The word doesn't fully arrive as a thought. It arrives as a physical sensation, a cold, spreading thing that starts in the chest and moves outward, because an empty weapon means she was never part of this next phase. She was placed outside, separated from Andy and Booker, with a weapon that can't do anything, which means whoever planned that arrangement knew what was going to happen inside and needed her out of it. Booker planned that arrangement. She moves. Not running. Running draws attention, and if Merrick's people are already inbound, she can't afford to be visible and flagged. She moves fast and deliberately, back toward the entrance, working through what she knows. Andy is in there. Booker has done something. Copley is involved. There are operatives coming. She has no weapon that works. She has her hands. She has training. She has the fact that whatever comes at her now can hurt her but can't finish her, which is, in this specific moment, the only asset that matters. The door is unlocked. She goes through it. What she finds inside arranges itself with terrible clarity. Andy on the floor, Booker standing over her with a specific stillness that isn't shock. It's the stillness of someone on the other side of a decision. Copley at his screens, on a call, the whole room carrying the particular quality of a situation that has already moved past the point where her arrival changes the outcome. She looks at Booker. He looks back. Neither of them says anything for a moment. And in that moment, in the specific way Booker meets her eyes without flinching, without the scrambling that guilt produces in people who didn't mean to get here, Nile understands that this wasn't impulsive, wasn't panic. He thought about it, made the choice with full awareness of what it was. "They're going to help us," Booker says. His voice is steady, still carrying the conviction even now, the thing he told himself that made this possible. Merrick's research, it could end this. For all of us. You'd be free. Nile looks at Andy on the floor, looks at the empty clip in her hand. "You didn't ask me," she says. Booker has no answer for this. Because it's the part of the logic that doesn't hold. The rationalization that works from the inside, that was built to justify what he needed to do, didn't include the person who was just 48 hours into her new life and had no vote in whether it ended. Merrick's vehicles arrive outside. And just then, the timing brutal, the irony fully intact, Andy moves. Not healed, not back to full. but conscious, and conscious is enough to be dangerous and even shot, even with a wound that isn't closing. She gets to her feet with the expression of someone who has been knocked down by worse things than this, and by people she trusted more than Booker. She looks at him. He looks at her. The vehicles outside get louder. None of this is going the way any of them planned. Merrick Pharmaceuticals occupies 6 floors of a glass and steel building in London that was probably designed to communicate something about innovation and progress and the clean forward momentum of science. Floor-to-ceiling windows, open-plan labs behind access-controlled doors, the kind of building that wins architecture awards and appears in press releases beside words like breakthrough and future-facing. Right now, it contains Joe and Nikki somewhere above the 5th floor, in conditions that don't appear in any press release. Getting Copley alone takes less effort than Nile expects. The chaos of Merrick's vehicles arriving at the flat, the rapid logistics of transferring Andy and Booker into custody, the noise and movement of it all. Copley exists in that chaos as an administrative presence rather than a tactical one. He's the architect, not the muscle, which means when Nile materializes at his elbow in the confusion, without a working weapon but with the very specific, focused energy of someone with nothing left to lose, he doesn't have a physical response available. She gets him into a side room, closes the door. "Talk," she says. Copley has been lying to himself for 2 years, not about the facts. The facts he's always known clearly, documented meticulously, arranged into the clean evidentiary chain that he brought to Merrick with the confidence of someone delivering a solved problem. The lying has been about the interpretation of the facts, the story he's been telling himself about what he was doing and why and what the outcome would look like. His wife's name was Celeste. The files he pulled up for Andy at the flat weren't a performance. They were the actual center of the thing, the grief that made the whole operation make sense from the inside. She died from something that shouldn't have been fatal with better treatment, better research, better understanding of the mechanism behind it. Copley believed, and maybe still believes, that the biology keeping Andy's team alive holds the answer to things like what killed Celeste. He believed Merrick would use it that way. Nile listens to this without interrupting. She's good at listening, the kind of listener who doesn't telegraph their responses while taking information in, who stores it and holds it and waits for the complete picture before responding. When Copley finishes, she doesn't offer sympathy and she doesn't offer condemnation. She asks one question. "Have you seen what Merrick is doing to them?" Copley is quiet. "Have you actually seen it?" she says. Not a question anymore. He hasn't. He's been kept on the intelligence and logistics side, the layer of the operation that involves cameras and databases and vehicle coordination, the layer that doesn't require him to go above the 4th floor. He told himself this was practical. He's not a scientist. What use would he be in the lab? But what it actually is, she can see him realizing it in real time, is insulation. Deliberate insulation from the thing he set in motion. Nile holds out her arm. She finds something sharp, a letter opener on the desk, inadequate for anything serious but sufficient for the demonstration, and draws it across her forearm with the steady hand of someone who has made peace with the pain involved. Copley watches the wound open, watches with the expression of a person whose rational mind is sprinting to catch up with their eyes as it closes. Not in a flash, not painlessly. He can see it working through, see the tissue responding, see the process that his surveillance cameras captured from a distance now happening 18 inches from his face. That's what they can do, Nile says. And upstairs, right now, someone is cutting into them to find out how, and they can't die, which means the cutting doesn't have an endpoint. The silence that follows is the sound of a man's self-justifying narrative collapsing under its own weight. She doesn't press further. She doesn't need to. Copley is not a bad man. She understood that from the flat, from the way he held the evidence of his wife's illness, from the genuine anguish underneath the professional composure. He's a man who did a bad thing for reasons he convinced himself were good, and now the distance between his intentions and his actions has closed to zero and he has to stand in the gap. "How do I get in the building?" she says. He tells her. The room they put Joe and Nikki in is white, clinically, aggressively white, the color of a space designed for observation rather than occupancy, where every surface is easy to clean and nothing is present that doesn't serve a function. The lights are the flat, even, shadowless kind that eliminate the visual variation that human psychology needs to anchor itself to. It's a room designed to disorient. Joe sits in it with the posture of someone who has been imprisoned in more uncomfortable circumstances and is not going to give this particular room the satisfaction of finding it difficult. He and Nikki are restrained. Not loosely. Merrick's people understood what they were dealing with well enough to go beyond standard restraint protocols, but restrained in a way that, given enough time and enough effort, an immortal body can work around. The problem is time. The problem is the white-coated researchers who arrive with the specific calm of people who consider this a professional task rather than a moral catastrophe. The first round of samples is taken with the clinical efficiency of people who have prepared extensively for this procedure. Joe makes no sound. Nikki watches the researchers with dark, even eyes, and what's in them isn't fear and isn't fury. It's something colder than either. The patience of a man who has survived 800 years of the world treating bodies like his as objects of fear or fascination or profit, who has learned that the people who do this always, eventually, discover that they've miscalculated something. They haven't miscalculated yet, but they will. Between procedures, when the researchers clear the room briefly, Joe turns his head toward Nikki. Their eyes meet across the white space. 800 years of being each other's anchor in every situation the world has produced. Crusades, inquisitions, wars whose names they were present for before those names existed. This room, these restraints, these fluorescent lights, it's genuinely not the worst thing they've been through. That doesn't make it fine, but it means they both understand, without needing to say it, that this is a scene in the middle of the story, not the end of it. Joe almost smiles. Nikki does. Barely, just enough, floor by floor, that's how it goes. Nile and Copley move through the building from the bottom, using his access credentials for the first 2 floors, before those credentials stop working. Merrick's security system has apparently registered that something is off about the night's logistics, or someone noticed Copley's absence. The 3rd floor requires improvisation. The 4th requires more. Nile, it turns out, is exceptionally good at improvisation. The training Andy pushed her through. The axe work, the hand-to-hand, the hours in the gray French morning finding her new limits, is present in every exchange on the way up. She doesn't fight the way she did on the military transport plane, defensive and tactical and careful. She fights with the specific freedom of someone who has accepted what she is and stopped spending energy on self-protection that isn't necessary anymore. Forward pressure, every movement aimed at getting to the next floor. Out of nowhere, she's on the 4th floor and Copley is 2 steps behind her, and there are 6 operatives between her and the stairwell. 6 is a lot for one person. Not enough. She moves through them with the accumulated confidence of a woman who has been in firefights, survived an aircraft fall, trained with someone older than recorded history, and had approximately the worst week of her life, and is still, somehow, standing. Still moving forward. There's a quality to her fighting now that wasn't there in the cargo hold, something settled. Not aggression. Not adrenaline. The deep, grounded competence of someone who has found her footing in completely new terrain and is no longer fighting the terrain itself. Copley keeps up as best he can. He's former CIA, he's not without capability, but he's also wise enough to understand that his role in this particular ascent is to be useful in the ways he actually can be, which means doors and codes and the institutional knowledge of the building's layout, and to stay out of Nile's way when she's moving. 5th floor, the labs. Joe hears them before the door opens. The sounds of the floor changing, the rhythm of the building disrupted, the specific quality of controlled chaos coming up from below. He and Nikki have been working at their restraints with the patient persistence of people operating on a timescale longer than the people who designed the restraints anticipated. The door opens. Nile. Joe's face does the generous, immediate thing. It does. The warmth that can't be suppressed even in a sterile white room after a night that would break most people. There she is, he says, with such complete, unperformed relief that it lands like a punch. Nikki is already working on the last of his restraints. Andy? Joe asks. Nile's face does something careful. We need to move first. Joe reads the careful. He doesn't push, but you see it. The knowledge that the careful means something, filed immediately, held for later. The researchers, to their credit, do not try to stop them. Whatever Merrick pays them, it isn't enough to physically intervene between 4 immortal people and the exit. They have the good sense to clear the room and make themselves absent from the situation with the speed of people who have suddenly and completely revised their professional risk assessment. Merrick is on the 6th floor. He's been there since the first alert came through from the lower levels, watching feeds, making calls, the Boy King expression replaced for the first time by something that reads closer to concern. Not full fear yet. He hasn't reached full fear yet because he still believes, somewhere in the architecture of his confidence, that the situation is manageable. that resources and planning and the structural advantages of being the person who controls the building can still resolve this in his favor. Then the door opens and it's Nile, alone, and his expression finishes its journey to fear. She doesn't give a speech. There's no monologue, no formal accounting, none of the villain confrontation theater that this moment in a lesser film would perform. She doesn't have the energy for it, and he doesn't deserve it. And honestly, the movie is too smart for that scene. What she does is cross the room to him with the directness of someone who has a clear purpose and no remaining patience. He tries to make the argument, the cure angle, the research, the good it could produce, the lives that could be saved with access to what his team now understands about their biology. He's articulate. The argument isn't stupid. Under different circumstances, with different methods, it might have been something worth hearing. These are not different circumstances. You want to know what you actually built up here? Nile says, and gestures at the lab through the glass partition. The white room, the restraints, that's what you built. Merrick opens his mouth. She throws him out the window, not metaphorically. The glass goes, Merrick goes with it, and the sixth-floor descent is swift and non-survivable in the way that sixth-floor descents are. He's not immortal. He doesn't come back. The whole enterprise, the funding, the research, the surveillance operation, the capture, the white room, built on the logic of one man's conviction that the world's most extraordinary people were his to use, ends on the pavement below with the decisive finality of something that was always going to resolve this way. Nile stands at the broken window. Wind comes in, old London air, carrying the sounds of the city at night, traffic, sirens somewhere distant, the indifferent noise of a world that doesn't know or care what just happened in this building. She breathes. The others find her there. Joe puts a hand on her shoulder, brief, solid, present, and says nothing because nothing is what the moment requires. Nikki stands at her other side. Copley hangs back near the door with the expression of a man taking a full account of everything he's responsible for and not looking away from any of it. Andy arrives last. She's moving carefully. Anyone who knows her would see it. Joe sees it, his eyes track to her side, to the way she holds herself, and the question is right there on his face before he consciously decides to ask it. Later, Andy says, the same way she's been saying it to herself all night, in the private accounting she's been running. Later, when there's time, when the immediate crisis resolves enough for the larger one to be addressed. Joe holds her gaze for a moment. He's known her longer than most civilizations. The later lands differently with him than it would with someone who hadn't watched her manage things alone for as long as he has. Not much later, he says quietly. She doesn't agree. She doesn't disagree. The building is quiet now. The researchers are gone. The operatives neutralized floor by floor on the way up. Merrick's infrastructure of certainty dismantled from the top down in a single night by a group of people he fundamentally underestimated. It has an almost simple quality in the aftermath. The way the conclusion of something enormous often does. The resolution arriving not with fireworks, but with a room going quiet and people standing in it. Nile looks at her hands. Steady. Still. The hands of someone who just did a necessary thing and has to figure out how to live with both the necessity and the thing. What happens now? She asks. Nobody answers immediately. The question is too large and too small at the same time. It asks about tonight and about forever, about the next hour and the next century, about what this team does when the crisis that organized them resolves and they have to decide, again from scratch, what they're for. Andy looks at her. We figure it out, she says. We always do. Outside, London moves in its own directions, unconcerned. The glass from the sixth-floor window is still settling somewhere below. The city doesn't notice. It never does. The morning after everything is always the quietest. Not peaceful. Quiet isn't the same as peaceful, and nobody in this group would use that word with a straight face after the night they've had. Quiet as in, the immediate crisis has passed. The adrenaline has metabolized. The building is no longer full of people trying to neutralize them. And now there's just the team, the wreckage, and the pile of things that need to be said. They find a space. Not the Merrick building. They're done with that building. But somewhere nearby, somewhere with enough room to stand apart from each other if needed, which it will be. Booker stands slightly separate from the group. He knows what's coming. He's known since the moment he made the choice. has been living with the shape of it since before Andy went down on Copley's floor. The thing about people who've been together as long as this team has is that the accounting is always clear. There are no misunderstandings to hide behind, no room to argue about intent versus impact when the people in the room have watched each other across enough centuries to know the difference. Andy speaks first. She usually does. She tells in the sentence, 100 years. No contact with the group. No communication, no location sharing, no connection of any kind for a century. Then, if he wants to find them, they'll be findable. 100 years is the sentence. Booker absorbs this without arguing. That matters, the not arguing. Because Booker is not someone who lacks words, who doesn't have the capability to make a case for himself. He could construct a defense. He chose not to, which is its own form of accountability. Joe says nothing. His silence is the loudest thing in the room. Nicky stands with his eyes on the middle distance, and the line of his jaw says everything his mouth won't. Nile watches all of this from the edge of the group, the newest member witnessing the longest relationship in the world handle a rupture that 100 years might or might not repair. She doesn't weigh in. It's not her accounting to manage. But she watches Booker, and what she sees isn't a villain completing his arc. She sees someone who was running on empty for so long that when an exit appeared, he took it, and is now living in the specific hell of knowing the exit was a trap, and that the people he hurt most are the ones he'd been trying to free. The goodbye between Andy and Booker is private. Brief. 200 years of trust broken, and whatever survives the breaking, compressed into a short exchange that the film doesn't fully show, which is exactly right. Some things don't belong to the audience. He walks away. They watch him go. Pages, hundreds of them. Copley's redemption doesn't arrive as a dramatic gesture or a single act of sacrifice. It arrives as data. After everything, the arrest of Merrick's remaining associates, the dismantling of the pharmaceutical operations infrastructure, the careful erasure of the surveillance files that couldn't be allowed to circulate, Copley spends 3 weeks pulling a different thread from his years of documentation, not footage of the team dying and regenerating. The other footage, the follow-on footage, downstream data. He'd been watching Andy and the others for years, tracking their movements, their operations, the jobs they took and the outcomes of those jobs, and somewhere in that tracking, buried under the surveillance imperative, was a different picture. The people they saved, the crises they resolved, the wars they prevented or shortened or interrupted at key moments. The individual lives that survived because this group of 4, impossible, ancient, exhausted, showed up when it mattered. He traces those lives forward. The child soldier rescued in one operation who eventually became a humanitarian advocate whose work saved thousands. The scientist protected in another job whose research produced a treatment, an actual treatment, the thing Copley always wanted, arriving through an entirely different path. The political collapse prevented that would have cascaded into regional war. The bodies of work, the families, the institutions, all of it existing in the world because Andy and her team kept choosing, century after century, to keep going. He presents this to them without ceremony, just the data, organized and clear the way he organizes everything. Andy reads through it for a long time. There's a moment, one of the best in the film and one of the easiest to miss if you're not watching carefully, where something shifts in her face. Not dramatically, not a tear or a visible crumbling, just a very small recalibration. The expression of a person who has been running on fumes for longer than memory and has just been handed, against all expectation, a reason. I love how they show this without underlining it. No swelling strings telling you how to feel, just Charlize Theron reading pages and the room staying quiet and the information landing the way real information lands, slowly, working its way through layers of defense before it reaches the part of you that needed it. You didn't have to do this, Andy says. I know, Copley says. He's made his case for what he is, separate from what he did. They don't absolve him? That's not how this group operates. Forgiveness here is a long-term project measured in demonstrated behavior rather than declared intention. But they give him something, a job. Run the intelligence side. Find them missions that matter. Be the infrastructure for what they do, since the infrastructure is the thing they've always been worst at. Copley accepts, quietly, like a man who understands he's been handed more than he deserves and intends to make something of it. Nile fakes her own death on a Tuesday. The paperwork is Copley's work, the logistics his particular expertise, making a person disappear from official record in a way that satisfies the institutional requirements without producing the kind of unresolved questions that generate investigations. She died in action. The details are classified, as such details often are. Her family receives the notification with the formal gravity of military protocol. Her mother grieves. Nile knows this, knows it and made the choice anyway, not because the loss to her family doesn't matter, but because the alternative, staying present and watching them age while she doesn't, produces a different kind of grief spread over decades instead of concentrated into one terrible moment. Neither option is good. This one is cleaner, kinder in the long run, even though it doesn't feel like it from where she's standing. She watches, from a distance, as Zeke stands outside the house in the gray morning air. He's the kind of person who processes things by being outside rather than in, and she knows this the way she knows the smell of her mother's kitchen, bone-deep, inherited knowledge. He stands there for a long time with his hands in his pockets. She doesn't go to him, she turns away. And here's the moment that KiKi Layne absolutely earns. The walk back to the car, away from her brother, away from everything that shaped who she was before a week ago, changed all of it. She doesn't crumble. She doesn't perform grief for the camera. She walks with the same groundedness she carries in every scene, the same refusal to fall apart under conditions that would justify it. But there's a quality to the posture, a slight weight added to it, a new heaviness that tells you exactly what this cost. She gets in the car. Andy is driving, doesn't ask, doesn't offer reassurance, just drives. After a minute, Nile says, "She's going to be okay." "Yes," Andy says. "That doesn't make it better." "No," Andy says, "it doesn't." 2 sentences. The whole film's emotional honesty compressed into an 8-second exchange between 2 women sitting in a car, neither of them pretending the math works out to something comfortable. 6 months later. Paris. Booker's apartment is the kind of place a person furnishes when they're not planning to stay. Functional, minimal, nothing on the walls that required a decision. He's been here long enough for the emptiness to stop feeling temporary and start feeling like a declaration of intent. He's drinking, not dramatically, not the movie drunk of someone making a visible statement, just a man at a table with a glass and the particular silence of a person who chose isolation and is now living inside it and finding it exactly as bad as it should be and refusing to be surprised by that. The knock at his door comes without warning. He doesn't move immediately. Visitors to this address are not something his current life produces. He goes to the door with the careful attention of someone who has lived long enough to know that unexpected knocks at night doors carry a range of possible meanings, most of them complicated. He opens it. Quinn. And this is the ending that the film earns completely and deploys with absolute precision. She's standing in the doorway in modern clothes, alive, free, 800 years of the worst imaginable experience written into eyes that are simultaneously ancient and present and pointed directly at him with an expression he cannot read. How? When? How long has she been out? How did she find him? What does she want? The film doesn't answer any of these questions. It gives you the image, and it gives you the implications, and it trusts you, correctly, to understand that this is not a conclusion but a detonation. Everything this moment means for Andy, for the team, for the balance of whatever comes next, is left to imagination and a sequel, and the restraint of that choice is this movie's final act of intelligence. Booker stares at her. She looks back. The door stays open. So what is the old guard, really? Strip away the action sequences, which are genuinely excellent, grounded and brutal in the way that good action should be, never tipping into the weightless CGI spectacle that makes so many superhero films feel consequence-free. Strip away the mythology, the ancient weapons, the centuries of backstory. What's left? A movie about exhaustion and purpose. About the specific crisis of continuing when continuing is hard, not because circumstances are terrible, but because the weight of time makes meaning difficult to locate. Andy is the most powerful being in the film and also the most depleted. She can survive anything except the loss of reasons to keep going. What the old guard understands, and what makes it genuinely better than most films in its genre space, is that immortality is only interesting as a metaphor. The fantasy of never dying is the surface. Underneath it is the thing most of us actually grapple with, not mortality, but meaningfulness. How do you keep doing the work when the work is hard and the results are unclear and the people you love keep leaving? How do you stay present in a world that keeps disappointing you? The answer the film offers isn't triumphant. It doesn't resolve into certainty or peace or some transcendent understanding. The answer is, you find your people, you find missions that matter, and you keep showing up. Not because it's easy or because it stops costing you, because the alternative, disconnection, withdrawal, Booker's apartment with nothing on the walls, is worse. Opley's pages make the case empirically. Every time they kept going, the world got better in ways they couldn't trace or quantify or even know about. The ripple effect of continuing. That's not nothing, that's everything actually. Does the film have weaknesses? Sure. The villain is underwritten. Merrick works as a functional antagonist, but Harry Melling doesn't get enough material to make him genuinely frightening, which dulls the stakes of the final confrontation slightly. The pacing in the middle sections occasionally loses momentum when the exposition gets dense. And the Booker betrayal, as earned as it is emotionally, moves slightly faster than it needed to. A few more minutes with him before the reveal would have made the payoff hit harder. But these are criticisms of a film that already cleared a bar most action movies don't attempt. The Old Guard isn't trying to be a franchise launcher, even though it is one. It's trying to be a movie about people, ancient and tired and still choosing to be here, and it succeeds at that with a consistency that's genuinely rare. The cast is the reason. Charlize Theron in a role that requires her to be the least demonstrative person on screen while carrying the most emotional weight, and she pulls it off without a single false note. KiKi Layne is the audience's entry point, grounded and smart and never playing the new recruit naivety as stupidity. Marwan Kenzari and Luca Marinelli as Joe and Nikki, they deserve their own film, frankly, and the Crusades flashback is iconic in the truest sense of the word. Matthias Schoenaerts doing more with Booker's silences than most actors do with dialogue. And Chiwetel Ejiofor threading the needle of a character who could have been a simple informant and instead becomes the film's moral conscience. This part hits different on a rewatch, by the way. Once you know about Booker, once you know about Andy's wound, once you know what Quinn's face at the end is going to mean, the whole film reorganizes itself into something richer. The small glances, the things characters don't say, the weight in Booker's careful flatness during the early conversations, it's all there. That's the mark of a film built with genuine care. If this deep dive did it for you, if you found yourself thinking about what the Old Guard is actually saying underneath all the action, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment telling me if you could add one scene to this movie, anything, a flashback, a missing conversation, a moment the film jumped past. What would it be? I read every single comment, genuinely. Thanks for being here. Go watch it again. First time or fifth time, it gives you something new. See you in the next one.